Hi guys, welcome back. So unless you've been basically living somewhere in the Arctic wilderness for the past several months, you've probably heard about Games Workshop's reboot of their fantasy kind of range and rule set. So they've got new armies, new mythology. The rules are totally different, and the opinions are very sharply divided at this point on whether that is a good thing or a terrible thing. I can't really speak about the rules because I haven't gotten to play yet. I really want to, but I haven't had time to put together an army. But as far as the figures are concerned, and I know this is going to attract some controversy, I honestly like them. I really like Games Workshop's kind of recent releases and style, and I know a lot of people don't. But for me, I don't know, it really does kind of fit with my taste, and I just think they're cool. And whatever you think, you have to admit there's sort of skill and sort of mastery that they brought to plastic figures recently. That's just really incredible. They have just taken it to a whole new level, and this sort of sharpness and detail and quality that they're getting out of their plastics, which I guess is a good thing given how much everything they make costs. But that's a whole nother story. I did have a chance to pick up the Age of Sigmar starter box not too long ago, and I've been working on the command figure myself from the Sigmarite army, so it's the big guy riding the dragon, and that's a lot of work, and I'm going real slowly with that because I want to do a good job. But this week I thought I'd show you how to paint one of the sort of more basic backbone figures of the Sigmarite army. This is a retributor, pretty stupid name if you ask me, but I think the guy looks really cool. He's really covered from head to toe in sort of metallic armor, most often gold, though you can go for silver if you want. I have left off his shield and shield arm for now just because it's going to make painting easier. So we'll do those things separately and then attach them together. Now, the only thing I will say is these figures are really, really heavy on the metallic paint, in case you haven't seen them before. So it's critical that you have good metallic paint. And as far as I'm concerned, there's really only one option there, and that is Vallejo Air metal colors. I've plugged them a lot in earlier videos, but in case I haven't said it enough, I'm going to say it again here. And especially with these figures, you really, really need that good metallic paint here, or otherwise you're gonna, it's just gonna make everything so much harder for you. It's what's gonna take a project like this from being, sort of a hair-pulling experience to one that's actually pleasurable. So definitely find those, order those online, pick them up somewhere so that, you can work on figures like this and, not just struggle the entire time. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started with painting this guy. First of all, here's a quick look at all of the different paints that I used when making this figure. First of all, I should say that there are a lot of different color combinations possible on these models, like with most Games Workshop forces. Now, the most common scheme you'll see on these Sigmarite units is gold and blue. I like the gold, but I didn't really want to do the blue, so I decided to opt for purple as my secondary color instead. So I'm going to start out by base coating those areas with a mixture of German gray and royal purple from Vallejo. Next, I'm going to just take plain royal purple from Vallejo and thin it down so it goes on nice and smooth, and I'm going to layer it over top of the base on those purple areas. When I'm painting the shield, I'm going to focus my highlighting towards the outside so that the center area is darker and the two edges are somewhat lighter. Now I'm going to create a slightly warmer shade by mixing just a hint of Citadel Evil Sun Scarlet into my royal purple. That'll make it a little pinker and a little rosier. You have to be careful here. If you put in too much, your color's going to get more pink than you want. So this first highlight layer over the just pure royal purple should have only a hint of that red in there. And I am then going to start applying that to highlight areas of the purple and sort of thin, even layers and gradually building it out. I'm then going to mix in even more Evil Sun Scarlet, and you can see that the purple is taking on even more red hue. And I'm then going to start layering that over my purple areas, just building up those highlights very, very gradually. And that's important here because on areas like the shield and the shoulder pads particularly, you've got big, open, smooth surfaces. And if you don't build your layers up gradually, it's going to be very hard to get a nice, smooth, blended effect. Finally, I'm going to mix just a hint of Vallejo beige into that color, which will make it a little bit more pastel, a little bit paler, and I'm going to use that as a sort of a very subtle edge highlight. That's especially going to work nicely on his terigis and on his loincloth. You need to be a little bit more careful with this faded color when you're applying it to the shield and arm pads because it's easy to mess up the effect. So if you put it there at all, really only put it very lightly along the edges. If you felt like that last step with the sort of pastel light purple went too far, you can always go back in with a purple wash to sort of unify and tone things down. That's what I did here using Citadel Leviathan purple. Now I'm going to base coat the areas under his armor and the other places that should be black. So that also includes here his belt and the leather part of his sword scabbard. I'm just using Vallejo black, but if you were careful, you might not even need to do this over your black base coat. Now I'm going to be highlighting those black and gray areas. I've taken a little bit of Vallejo dark blue gray and mixed it into my black, and I'm going to use that as sort of an all-over highlight. And then I'm going to gradually add in more dark blue gray to lighten it and apply 2 successive extra layers to help highlight the edges of the leather and black pieces and any sort of folds or creases in them. The final highlight should be just pure dark blue gray, but you really only want to apply that to the tops of heavy wrinkles or folds. Now I'm going to start base coating all the gold areas on this figure, and that's pretty much everything else. Well, not quite, but really nearly everything else. I have made a mixture here of Vallejo Air Gold and German Camouflage Black Brown, so that I'm getting a very sort of nice dull gold color. This is going to take quite a bit of paint, so make sure you mix enough. I would also recommend, if you're going to be painting a whole force of these guys, it might actually be advisable to do this step first before you paint any of the other pieces, because it's going to be easier just to go over and blob on the gold paint and then come back in and pick out the other smaller areas versus how I did it here. I had to avoid those areas I'd already painted, which made it a little bit more troublesome and time consuming.
Next, I'm going to apply an overall wash of Reikland Flesh Shade to all the gold areas. You can put this wash on pretty heavily, but just make sure that that it's smooth and even. Don't let it pool on smooth surfaces. Just make sure it builds up down in the cracks, but nowhere else. I just want to point out really quickly about the shield. On the inside of the shield, I opted to paint that purple as well, and I used the same colors as I did everywhere else. I just didn't highlight it as far, so I only applied the sort of darkest 2 or 3 highlights to that rear area. I'm going to be opting for sort of a subtle highlighting technique on this gold. And the first layer I'm applying here is going to be Vallejo Air Gold with just a little bit of the German black brown mixed in to darken it ever so slightly, but not to the extent that we darken the base coat. I'm going to be applying this pretty much everywhere except really down in any really heavy shadow areas or any folds or lines or sort of creases between different parts of the armor. You want to leave those in your base, but nearly everywhere else can have this color. The paint should be pretty thin too, so you can go back over the areas several times and build up some more intense color too, where you want stronger highlights to happen. For the next highlight, I've just grabbed pure Vallejo Air Gold, and I'm going to be applying it in similar areas, but I'm going to be applying it thinner. Generally speaking, you should be finding the areas where you think the most light is going to be hitting, applying your paint there first, and then sort of dragging it out from there and sort of blending it outwards. Because you're working with colors with very little variation between them, that is to say the step between the darker and lighter colors is small. That means that it's pretty easy to do this. You won't have to work very hard at blending. And the gold paint is nice and thin, and you can get it extra shiny too just by going back over areas several times and kind of building it up. This is really fun, and it's pretty hard to mess up. Just sort of start picking out areas where light is hitting and building up your gold until you're happy with it. To create my final highlight on the gold, I'm going to mix about 50-50 Vallejo Air Gold and Vallejo Air Silver together. And I'm going to make sure the paint is real thin, and I'm going to apply it thinly too. You do not want to apply this step very heavily over the gold, or it'll get too washed out and too silvery looking. What you want to do here is look for the areas that are extra shiny already on the figure, and that's very easy to do because we're using metallic paint, so it's easy to see where the light's already hitting. And then you just want to take this paint and exaggerate those areas further with a very thin layer. You can build it up a little bit here and there if you want in areas that are really, really shiny, like the top of his head or those little spikes on his helmet, and just some sort of edges, particularly where there's a sort of a break in the armor plating. All of those can take extra emphasis. Any larger flat areas, you want to make sure that highlight is fairly subtle. But this way, with these sort of just very careful light accents, you're going to give that gold is just extra intensity and radiance and really make him look incredibly blinged out. Now he has several white accents on his armor and on his shield. I'm base coating those with Vallejo Sky Gray. You can see I'm focusing on the little lightning bolts on his right shoulder, and then on his left shoulder you just need to hand paint a large lightning bolt emblem. In the starter box, they also provide decals for this, so if you really don't feel comfortable with it, you can put on a decal, but I think it's a relatively easy figure to freehand yourself. I'm then just going to go back over those white areas very quickly with white paint and brighten them up. Because white's transparent, you will probably need a couple of layers to get this sort of desired intensity. Particularly the hand-painted lightning bolt motif is going to need some extra layering to really make it pop out. Because I've finished enough of the painting on this model, I've also now glued the shield on. It just makes finishing the model a lot simpler with that on the model. Now I'm going to base coat two other small areas of the model that are still very important. The first is this sort of ruined scroll attached to his belt. I'm base coating that with Vallejo beige. Because it's over black, you'll probably need to apply a couple of layers to get enough coverage. I'm also going to be base coating the handle of his hammer. I'm using Vallejo saddle brown for that. I'm then going to wash both of those areas. I'm washing the handle, again with Reikland Flesh Shade, and I'm going to be washing the scroll using Agrax Earth Shade. It's important mostly that you get that nice dark brown down in sort of the letters written on the piece of paper. Now I'm going to go back in and start highlighting the hammer handle. I'm first going to take just pure saddle brown again and work it back over the area that I just washed. Because the wash was so dark, it's still going to make a pretty big difference. I'm then going to mix just a little bit of beige into the saddle brown and use that as an edge highlight to help further define those little leather wrappings on the handle. If you mess this up, because it is kind of hard to paint this, it's really, really small, and I messed it up a little bit, you can then go back in just to apply another wash and kind of bring it out some more and then kind of pick it out again, and that works pretty well. Next, I'm going to highlight the ruin scroll. First, I'm going to make a mixture of the beige and some Vallejo white, and I'm just going to start going over pretty much all areas of the scroll and just avoiding getting the color down into those text kind of engraved areas. You then want to sort of start thinking about the areas where more light would be hitting, where the sort of the top of those waves in the paper, in other words, and you want to be putting stronger and more color on those areas and building it up there further. You can then continue the highlighting process just using pure white, again really focusing on those areas that are sort of sticking out the most and along the top edge, and just building it up until you've got kind of a pleasant kind of cream color with some lighter white accents. Now I'm going to be painting the steel and metal areas, and that includes the sort of scales on his loincloth and the head of his hammer. I'm base coating those areas first using Vallejo Air gunmetal. I'm then going to apply a nice generous wash to all of those areas of Nuln Oil. Just be careful on the hammer head that you don't get too much pooling on the big flat smooth areas. Finally, to highlight, I'm going to mix the gunmetal and silver together because I don't want anything quite as intense here as pure silver. With the scales, I'm just going to carefully pick them out with this lighter highlight color so there's still a nice dark definition between them. On the hammerhead, I'm really going to be highlighting most of the big flat surfaces with this color. I'm just going to apply it nice and thinly, And that way I can build it up a little bit and make it brighter in some areas, which is kind of what you can see I'm doing here. If you want, you can then go back in with just pure Vallejo Air Silver and really accentuate, almost as edge highlight, some of the really thin, sharp edges on the hammerhead and the little rivets and those kind of things. But I recommend you be a little careful here. You don't want this to be really, really brilliant silver. At least I wouldn't. And of course, if it gets too bright, you can always go back in with a little bit of Nuln Oil Wash and darken it down in places where it just feels too shiny. Okay, so here's the finished Age of Sigmar Liberator figure. This really wasn't all that hard to paint, as it turned out. It's really a very limited palette of colors, and you don't have to worry about some of the difficult edge highlighting and things that you run into on, say, 40k Space Marines. That said, I probably would have done some things differently if I had a chance. For example, if I was painting a lot of these guys, particularly, I'd probably base coat the whole figure in gold to begin with and then highlight from there, because it would save a lot of time sort of having to pick out the gold areas after having already done the purple and black. So that would be a good time save. The other is I wasted an awful lot of time doing the purple here just because I didn't have very good paints from Vallejo. I only had maybe like 1 or 2 shades of purple, and I didn't use them optimally, so I had to mess around kind of mixing up different highlight shades that I didn't really like, and then kind of constantly making adjustments to get the tone I wanted. So next time I definitely pick out colors just straight from the bottle that were more complementary. But other than that, this figure really was a lot of fun to paint, and I'm really looking forward to doing some more in the future. So if you like this video, of course, please like it, share it, leave me your comments and let me know what you thought, and do remember to subscribe too, of course, if you haven't done so already. And I think that's all for now, so I will be seeing you next week.